Laurent, sorry to step on your moderating role, but I know, Barbara, you need to leave early.
Yeah.
You're going to have to leave in a few minutes. So I thought if anyone wants to interact with Barbara on any of her points, now's the time to do it. We want to hear Nabeel and obviously get further discussion going. Please
Yes.
direct your questions if you have them to Barbara.
Very much for this contribution, and I'm delighted to hear someone else going on about development rather than counterterrorism in Yemen, a theme I've been pushing for the last 50 years or so. But my question really is, I mean, I was very impressed by what by Mustapha reminding us that in 12 months' time we might possibly have a US Congress that is more returns to republicanism, which of course I think is probably bad news. And also to you saying that this wouldn't necessarily change the position on Saudi Arabia. So I'd really like to hear more about this, because certainly when I first heard Mustapha, I thought, oh Lord, this is it. You know, we're going to be back to Trump. And it would be quite comforting to have some evidence to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that we were not going to have a Republican Senate and House in 12 months' time. I don't know that for sure, but I think we need to look back that even when we had our former president and his remarkable embrace of all things Saudi, that there was considerable pushback in both the Senate and the House, including from some conservative Republican senators and congressmen. There was, I think that there was a great deal of discomfort with the embrace of Saudi Arabia. The Emirates are a completely separate issue. That's a whole nother hour's conversation. But I think that there is a growing recognition that Saudi Arabia is not necessarily a constructive partner with some of our longer term interests. There was a great deal of pushback, again, from some conservative Republicans about the humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen, which we haven't even talked about. But the humanitarian catastrophe, while it goes off the radar, if we have Afghanistan collapsing, it's actually starting to come back again. That humanitarian issue is always there. And the idea that we are complicit in what the Saudis were doing was something that Americans pretty much across the board were very, very uncomfortable with that. And so I am not convinced that a return to Republican control of Congress would lead to a return to the Trump embrace of Saudi Arabia. And I also think that, you know, that Biden's efforts to recalibrate that relationship has brought up MBS, brought him up short. Biden didn't even call him because he's not a head of government or a head of state. He sends his national security advisor to deal with him. And so I think that there is this kind of push, and I think the Saudis have begun to recognize that. I don't know if MBS will miscalculate and think that he can go back to a Trumpian kind of relationship, but if he does, it is a miscalculation. So I think that there is a dynamic within the US to try to support some kind of resolution of this war, and a recognition that its continuation is not in our best interest. It is not a priority for us, however, and we need to recognize that. So we have shifted to a more active support for a peaceful negotiation, but understanding the limits of our bandwidth and our interest. And my concern has always been not just the conduct of the war and how we and the Saudis dragged us into this war, but really what happens the day after. How do we move from I have a course in the spring called When Peace is Not Enough about Yemen. And that I think is our real interest.
I don't think that all is lost. I think it is good to preach moving to one side or the other, and I definitely favor the use of the carrot approach, a huge development plan that could appeal to everybody in Yemen. And it's good to support the United Nations and the UN Special Envoy, but it's not enough for a superpower like the US to say that our envoy supports the work of the UN envoy. You need to come in with a stronger approach, with a more clear notion, with a more clear plan of here's how we view the big picture. Here's how we view the end result of negotiations. You have to give people something to work towards. And a lot of the participants in the war in Yemen don't see what the next step would be. As they didn't see what the next step would be after Hodeidah, they don't even see, like, if the siege is lifted partially off of Sana'a and Hodeidah, what would be the next 2, 3, 4 steps after that? And that the US is not being clear about, and it needs to have a much stronger vision and much stronger plan to bring to the table on that. Finally, I would say the Yemeni side, and there's so much factionalism right now, and it's true, it's mostly on the pro-Hadi side. If they were more unified, they would present a better front, both militarily and diplomatically. But there is a need for more leadership among Yemenis. I think everybody has criticized Hadi to death, but it's true. But I don't see anybody emerging. The Yemenis need strong leadership that they could believe in. And that leadership can present a stronger Yemeni vision and a stronger Yemeni plan. They can't depend totally on the region, the US, or the United Nations, because most likely in the end they will fail them. Sorry to end on this pessimistic. Yeah.
I have some remarks on what Nabeel has said and what he ended with, that there is no leadership present that can replace Hadi. The question that will come or pop up is, where will they be? In Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Cairo, in Istanbul? There is no one left in Yemen. Everybody's outside the country. So talking about the leadership, you have to have them on ground in Yemen. And during this time, it is, if the Saudis are not happy with any of this leadership, all what they can do, just ban them from traveling. They cannot go back. What can they do? Like what they have done on several occasions, different personalities. So yes, I agree there must be a new leadership coming up and presenting themselves as an alternative or as a support for the so-called legitimacy. But in the present times, it's very hard. In the past, we knew that if you had a problem in Egypt, you would go to Syria. If you cannot go to Syria, you would go to Iraq. If Iraq is not hospitable, you would go to Beirut. But now, you cannot. All borders are shut. So this part of our wish is not doable. The second remark is that about when Helen and you emphasize on a front, unified front, anti-Houthi unified front. Honestly, knowing what's happening, all the entities have been fragmented. from 2014 onwards. The only entity that has kept itself relatively intact is Islah Party. With all the differences within their within the structure, they have maintained the leadership, although there are some voices that criticize the old generation of the Islah, of the leadership, but still it's covered. It has not come public. And if you look at the other entities like the GPC, we know how many GPCs we have now. We have Tariq GPC, we have Ahmed Ali, we have Sana'a, we have Egypt. So the GPC itself, as Nabeel knows very well, Michael knows, and Barbara and Helen, everyone on the panel here knows that the GPC has never been a party of principles. It was a party of interests. People had interest in the government and coming, getting closer to Sana, so they would just join, or forced to join. If you are a minister, by default, you will be a member. My last remark is that I said this to Lender King when I met him last time in Riyadh 2 months ago. And I said, don't try to pacify those whom you meet here in Riyadh or in Cairo. Try to find incentives. What could incentivize them to go into a peace process? And I told him bluntly, if I were Hadi, personally, knowing that any peace process will end by kicking me out of the door, I would not sign any deal. Why would I sign it? And I gave him an example of myself when I was, and it's bad to keep repeating it, but when I was the deputy foreign minister, my salary at the time in Sana'a was $200, 36,000 riyals. Now, the deputy foreign minister living in Riyadh, his salary is $8,000 plus, so it gets to $11,000. Why would he be interested in going back to Sana'a or anywhere? So we have to find incentives. What could be the incentive for Hadi to go into peace? And then we have to ask ourselves, what is the peace that could be achieved now? When you have only one force, we have to be very clear and very candid here. There is only one military force in the country, unified, and without the air campaign from the Saudi, they will just go everywhere in Yemen again. We have to be very frank there. No legitimacy or no national army, not even the STC can handle it. They cannot. And we saw that in Bayhan, we saw it next to Abyan. We know the Houthis are warriors. They will just go without the air campaign coming from the Saudis. So we have always to think about what are the incentives that we can give to the Saudis. And my final point here is that about 2216, I agree, it cannot be implemented anymore because of the constraints that Helen rightly mentioned. And the GCC, but Hadi is holding them, grasping the 2216 and the GCC initiative, because both have his name mentioned in both the initiative and 2216. It was never mentioned the President of the Republic. It was always mentioned Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. And that was a fatal mistake that the Saudis blame themselves for now, but it's too late.
I mean, I won't prolong the discussion very much, but I think I agree with the thrust of the discussion. Helen started it, but Nabeel and Mustapha have picked up on it, is that, and I think it's the lesson that we learned from Afghanistan, the lesson that I take from Afghanistan is that without a viable alternative to the Houthis, or in the case of Afghanistan, to the Taliban, the Houthis will win. And even if they don't win, they can stay and the situation continue. Both things, I think, they're both as bad as each other almost. The continuation of the war or a Houthi victory are almost as bad as each other in terms of outcomes. So how do we generate something which isn't either of those things? And I think what we saw in Afghanistan was the Western attempts to back up a corrupt and feeble administration failed. And so we have to find an alternative. I agree, you know, there has to be some legitimacy, but the legitimacy has to represent something which other Yemenis can look up to. And at the moment they don't. Nobody looks up to the legitimacy as such. So that needs to be created. And that's extremely difficult, as you've all pointed out. That doesn't make it easy, but without that, we either end up with a Houthi takeover or a war going on for a very long time. So that requires, as Helen said, getting the party, the non-Houthi parties, the leaders, the warlords, whoever they are, they have to be induced with incentives, maybe, Mustapha, but you know, somehow to sit round a table and work out their differences in the short term and come up with something which is better than the existing situation, so that the people can feel that and I agree, this is something which Yemenis have to sort out amongst themselves, that they can feel that this is something which they want. Because at the moment, I don't think there's anything, you know, what's going on in Aden is not significantly better than what's going on in Sana'a. You know, so why would people stand up to the Houthis? Why would the Houthis feel under any pressure? And that's difficult. I think it requires the Saudis to change their approach a bit, not completely, but it requires them to use more pressure and to understand that they have to use their muscle and their financial control over many of these things to bring about changes, whether that's in the central bank or whether that's on, you know, I think, frankly, I think that the closure of Sana'a airport and the obstacles at Hodeidah port are hugely in the Houthis' advantage at the moment. The Houthis are delighted. It takes all the pressure off them. These are things which should be brought to an end as quickly as possible. And only then will you start to see that the Houthis begin to feel a little bit of pressure. So we need to slowly build up pressure on the Houthis, and that involves those opposed to them working much more closely together and setting aside their disagreements for the time being, however difficult that is.
But we've actually got through the program, so to speak. In a sense, we've answered the three questions. But if anybody wants to make a final comment, please do so.
Yeah, we never
I'll
formally
just
came to
jump
the
in, sorry.
third, but I think we did address that issue of paying attention to local players inside.
Yeah, it came in.
And
Yeah.
the big issue is finding a way to engage with Ansar Allah and all of the other actors on the opposite side. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I thought this was a very good discussion. We covered a vast territory, and it is a very complicated issue. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
See you all.
So long.
Okay.
Yeah.
Be well.